one half of a BMW, would it? If you have a number value that has no decimal point in it, like 110 or 1531, well, these are considered integer numbers. Float numbers, numbers that can have fraction values. Say, a box in MaxScript can be 10.5 units high, a float number. The type's full name is actually floating point number, so in case you hear that name, don't get confused, it's the same thing. Whenever the number has a decimal point in it, it's considered a float number. So 1.5, 10.93, or 100.0 are considered float numbers. Even though 100.0 is an integer number in real life, since it has a decimal point in it, Max treats it as a float number. Strings. Well, these are text values basically. Object names are an example in Max for such a variable type, but there are many other uses for this type. Since scripting code itself is simple text as well, to differentiate string values from our code, we use quote marks at their beginning and their end. So, this is a string, while this is not a string. Color values. Well, this is a value type that consists of three other values, sub-values, so to say. Since all colors are made of a green, a red, and a blue color channel, it makes sense to incorporate all three into one single value type. So when we define a single color value, it would look something like this. Color 255.00, where the red value in the color is 255, and the green and blue are 0. 0.3 values. Well, there are other value types that are made out of multiple values like color values were. 0.3 is made out of three float numbers x, y, and z. Typical use for them is position data. They are defined as follows. Where the first value in the rectangular brackets is x, the second one is y, and the third one is z. Booleans. Boolean values are the simplest of all. They can only be true or false, or on or off. This is the value that's behind checkboxes, for example. Do we have motion blur turned on for a given object? Well, the resulting value will be a Boolean one. So we can have true, false, or on or off. Concluding this, no matter what the type of a value is, whether it's a box in our scene or an integer number or a modifier, it can be put into a variable to be used in a command later on. There is a MaxScript command that helps us identify the type or class using a programming term of a value, and that is class_of. The brackets after the function's name are an indicator to the fact that this is a function. So if it would be referring to get from our get some bananas example, we would say get. Now let's try this new function we learned. Type the following in the listener window. Class_of 10. Then use Shift Enter to run it. It returns integer. Using class_of 10.6 for example, use either Shift Enter or the numpad enter key. It will result in float because, as we said, using a decimal point in a number would make it a float number, a non-integer number. Now let's try something else to illustrate how this would actually work with a variable. So let's say x equals 10, then use Shift Enter or the numpad enter to evaluate it. There you go. Then try class_of x and run it again. The result is integer. That's because the class_of function looked into the variable x, found the value of 10 in it, and then it returned the type of that value. We can also try it with a different type of a value. Let's say a string. X equals, this is my string value. If you remember, well, when we defined how strings are actually used, you have to put quote marks at the start and end of the text. So don't forget that, otherwise it's going to give us a red error message. So use Shift Enter. There you go. We put x. If we put this is my string value into x, now let's try class_of x. And now it returns string, because when class_of function now looks into the x variable, it finds this string value in it, and the type of that value is string as we defined. We can of course use more descriptive names for variables, not just simple x or y. The only rule we have to keep is not to use a word that's already being used by MaxScript for something else, like a function's name or a type's name. So our previous example could also look like this: my string equals this is my string value. Then class of my string. What if we had box equals this is my string value? Well, this wouldn't work. It gives us the error message cannot assign to read-only variable box, because box is already assigned to something. That's a type name. That's the type of the geometry object named box. Giving more descriptive names to variables helps us understand and grasp more complicated scripts easier. So always try to name your variables wisely. There is a special variable in MaxScript, which is the $sign. When used as is, it refers to the currently selected geometry object. It has other uses as well, which we'll get back to later on. But let's try this by creating a geosphere object, selecting it, then running this line. So let's create a geosphere. Then run this line, just as is, just the $sign. There you go. This is what MaxScript returned to us. Max now printed the type of the value that is in the variable $sign. This container that holds the current selection, in our case, a geosphere named geosphere01. Another example of the $sign's usage could be delete $sign. Try to run it. There you go. It takes the currently selected objects and removes them from the scene. The delete function takes whatever is passed to it and deletes it. As the function's name suggests, it deletes whatever is passed to it. In this case, it was a geosphere. So let's try this again by creating a couple more objects and use this MaxScript line with them. Say a sphere, a cylinder, a torus. Let's just select the sphere, then let's rerun this delete $sign line. Now it removed just the sphere, but if we select both of these objects and run this line again, it will remove both of the objects. So we now have a clear scene. Let's clean these two windows by going edit, clear all up here in the pink area, and edit, clear all down here in the white area to have a fresh start. So to sum up, we can create variables to hold any type of values in them. And we can use these variables to easily pass the given values between functions. There's a special variable which will be very important to us, the $sign. It's always holding the current selection in itself. If no objects are selected, its value will be undefined, as we would expect.